If there's one season of Super Sentai that could be argued as being one of the strangest yet most enjoyable toku series of the past few years, it'd have to be Avataro Sentai Donbrothers. Masterfully written by Toshiki Inoue, while the previous year's Sentai, Kikai Sentai Zenkaiger, started what could be considered the new Sentai Renaissance, it was Donbrothers that really cemented how different Toei aims to make each season going forward. While the series, with its bad CGI rangers and supposed continuing story from the previous entry, put people off initially, it eventually won over a lot of people by, I guess, just being Donbrothers? I don't know how to describe it, the show kind of just needs to be seen to be believed. Which is why if you haven't seen the show yet, I'd recommend not watching this video. One factor in which the show strays away from the status quo, and perhaps part of why the show is so beloved, is that every major character has some kind of connection or significance to the overall plot and themes of the story. I don't want to dive too deep into the Don Bros relationship chart right now, so the long and short of it is that every character, albeit not actively, forms a gear in the machine that is this story. It's these connections and heavy involvement in the narrative that make a lot of these characters fan favorites. However, if you asked any person online, okay, not literally any person, there's one amongst the many characters that would more than likely not be their favorite. And it's one of my goals today to answer why. Folks, allow me to introduce you to Shinichi Saruhara, also known as Sarubrother. Ahem. Shinichi Saruhara is a 21-year-old man with no job or career and no reliable stream of income, which works for him because he personally believes money is the root of humanity's evil. He lives his life focused on the Japanese ideology and aesthetic sense known as Wabi-sabi. In layman's terms, the acceptance of our own mortality and of our flaws as humans. He expresses this acceptance of the imperfections of the world around him through the art of haiku, a non-rhyming form of poem limited to 17 syllables. It's also one of the many ways he manages to live day to day without using money. Which is good for him, as mere contact with any form of it causes his skin to burn, akin to how the sun burns a vampire. This suggests that his devotion to his beliefs is so powerful that he's mentally forced his body to undergo physiological restructuring to prevent himself from ever breaking. If he's unable to purchase food for himself, he simply creates the image of food within his head, and that manages to sustain him nutritionally, somehow. He refers to this technique as imaginary cooking. He primarily helps people with whatever problem they seem to have, usually coming up with a good solution. This has caused people to refer to him as Professor, even though he has no legal credentials to grant him such a title. One day, he finds a smartphone lying on the ground. Upon picking it up, a pair of sunglasses attach themselves to his face, allowing him to see many strange things imperceivable to the normal human eye. From then on, he occasionally finds himself teleported to battle with several other warriors, collectively known as the Donbrothers. Upon first glance, one might mistake him for a gorilla, which his body morphs into upon transforming. But, as made apparent by the red marking on his posterior, he's actually a Japanese macaque, or snow monkey. From then on, he would have many adventures, from meeting his predecessor as a Donbrother, to temporarily turning into one of the monsters they swore to defeat, to coming face to face with a deadly machine sharing his own face, to meeting his future self from an alternate timeline who seemingly abandoned all of his current beliefs in favor of love with a girl he met when she was in high school. Don't think too hard about that last one. Over the course of the year, he would make many allies, fight many a great battle, all the while staying steadfast in his beliefs and lifestyle. And throughout all of this, one question has been slowly made apparent. A question that the world that Saruhara inhabits refuses to give a clear answer to. Mainly, why is he here, exactly? Despite being one of the 9 main characters, Saruhara is the only one that doesn't have any sort of story arc whatsoever, outside of the standalone episodes that focus on him. He doesn't appear to have any emotional stakes in the story which he's a part of, outside of the overall stakes he shares with literally every other character. And I have to guess that the reason he really doesn't stick in the minds of too many people is because once his character is initially introduced to us, he pretty much stays at the place he's at while every other character grows and develops beyond their original characterization. Now, I know this is kind of an unfair expectation to hold a character to in this context. Super Sentai, at least from the seasons I've seen, hasn't always given equal amounts of development to every character. And that's okay, because the important thing at the end of the day is how the character is written, the overall intent the writer is trying to get across with them being a part of this narrative. Which makes it a bit weird with Donbrothers, as the theme of the season is very explicitly about the bonds between people that allow them to grow and change for the better. And here we are with a character who doesn't form any of those kinds of bonds with anyone. Okay, I get that Saruhara does in fact create bonds with people. It's just that those bonds aren't heavily focused on or greatly impact the plot as much as everyone else's. I figure maybe that there's supposed to be some kind of significance to the fact that he doesn't have any strong connections to anyone in the cast. Except, wait a minute. For context, Goshikita Kaito is the main character from the Sentai before Donbrothers, Zenkaiger, who's carried over from that show. He operates the cafe the Donbrothers frequent, while also being the team admin and occasionally transforming when the need arises. He's arguably one of the characters most detached from the entire narrative of Donbrothers, with his whole purpose in the story, outside of being the team support, effectively being more of a meta-narrative about the cycle of yearly shows and the constant cycling of protagonists. With him, you can clearly tell his detachment from anything going on in the story is intentional on the writer's part. Probably because he was shoehorned in as a way of making this a Zenkaiger sequel without actually being a Zenkaiger sequel. So yeah, Saruhara being detached from everything was just, I guess, a thing that Toshiki Inoue intentionally settled on. Maybe his original plans involving the Noto trio dying at the show's midway point had him playing a bigger role? Who knows? I guess this is just a little disappointing for me because taking that aspect of him out of consideration, Saruhara is the most fascinating character in Donbrothers. I don't know, something about this tranquil monkey man just living his life is super fascinating to me. The idea that, at the outset of the series, there's a character who's pretty much the antithesis to the mindset which creates the predominant threat our heroes are facing, it's probably the reason he was created. I think. I don't know, could just be a coincidence. And he's probably the funniest too. What, Taro dies every time he tells a lie? My man can't touch money because he willed his own body to hurt itself every time he touches it. Sometimes I wonder how much better Saruhara would do in a different Sentai show. Not one where he's the focus, but one written without the intent of connecting all of the characters together. Maybe he'd do better in a Sentai with a larger variety of zany personalities, where making everything connect isn't a priority, like Kyoryuger or Ninja. No, I don't think that'd work. If the only way I can enjoy this character is to effectively divorce them from the context in which they were created, then why don't I just invent a new character entirely? I don't want to believe that Saruhara was just some character that was created to fill a quota, or that his potential got squandered by other characters maintaining relevance. There's more to him than just a static personality that has no purpose. There's got to be more to him. I just know it. I just have to think about it. I just have to think about it as many different ways as I can. Saruhara is another facet, and his humor and simply necessity and present moments lack any degree of importance. Huh. Is this what doublethink is like? Or I guess triplethink in this case? I don't know what my dad was warning me about. That didn't seem so bad. Alright, let's go down 3 of the potentially endless, but most likely limited, perspectives one can have to recontextualize Saruhara to better fit into the narrative of Donbrothers. Starting with... Okay, just to clarify, there's nothing wrong with a character being comic relief. If the writer sets out with the intention for them to be that, then that's perfectly fine. I'm also not a great judge as to what people find funny, so if a writer gives their comic relief material I don't vibe with, that's fine too. Because while there's definitely a means by which writers can craft objectively funny comedy, I do not control what someone finds funny from their subjective point of view. With that said, I personally think Saruhara is hilarious purely from a conceptual level. He's this jobless man who pays for things exclusively with spoken word art. How the fuck does that work in modern society? It just does. But when you compare him to the other members of the team, he's no more or less absurd than anyone else. The only difference is that their weirdness is complemented by the narrative. Taro's eccentricities are explained as part of his Don clan lineage, Haruka's manga eventually leads to bridging the connection between Noto and humanity, and Kijino, I'm not so sure complemented is the right word, but Inoue kept finding things to do with him. If you ask me personally, Saruhara really shines as a comedic character when the series is actively drawing upon the fact that he has no relevance as a source of comedy. Here, let me give 2 examples. Exhibit A, romance. At one point, Saruhara points out, in a very self-aware manner, that he doesn't have any strong connections to any of the Noto. So what does he do? He decides to romantically pursue Sononi. Just because, I guess. This is the closest thing Donbrothers does to actively acknowledging Saruhara's lack of relevance within the narrative of the show itself. And seeing how little bearing this plot point has on the rest of the show, we can definitely conclude that it was written as a joke. A lot of subjective stuff in this perspective's favor as of right now, but next, we have arguably the strongest point supporting it. Exhibit B. Killer Death Robots! In Donbrothers episode 39, one of the funniest episodes of Donbrothers and possibly my single favorite episode of a tokusatsu ever, we're introduced to Dawn Killer, a killer robot created with the sole purpose of eliminating the Donbrothers. Dawn Killer is presented as one of the biggest threats the team has faced up to this point, being able to overpower Don Momotaro, whose entire thing is that he's virtually unbeatable from the series' outset. To further add to the plot importance the show's trying to impart onto this character, he's given the same appearance as our Red Ranger, drawing a parallel to several instances of evil Red Senshi in shows past. The situation is treated as seriously as possible, to the point where Kaito, who's basically been an outside observer for most of the show, has to step in and effectively treat this situation with the seriousness that it warrants. The Noto are unable to defeat it, most of the team gets taken out in the exact same way, and Jiro isn't nearby to help. So how do our heroes stand a chance against this unstoppable monster? By summoning a second killer robot meant to kill the first killer robot, called Dawn Killer Killer. And he looks exactly like Saruhara for no logically explainable reason outside of aesthetics. Then the 2 robots get into a fight, matching each other blow for blow, and presumably fighting in the cosmos for all of eternity. The fact that the episode, for the longest time, was trying to impart this feeling of importance and tension to the character of Dawn Killer, only to pull the rug out from under us by introducing another robot meant to undercut all of the stakes being built up, with the same face as the character with the least amount of stakes in the entire show, it's just sublime. I could write a whole video about why I love this episode. Who am I kidding? I probably couldn't. Maybe I'll just clip this part out and upload it on its own, who knows. But anyways, that's one perspective. Saruhara is a comic relief character whose comedy is at its best when deriving from the fact that his character has no plot relevance. Probably not the most common take on his character, but... No, wait, hang on. Maybe basing your perception on whether or not they work as a form of comedy and inherently subjective taste isn't a solid method of character analysis. Sorry, my bad. I guess trying to find objective truth through a subjective medium was a stupid idea. Maybe I should try a different route, like research and citations. Or citation. In episode 42, a phony exorcist gives psychic readings to all the members of the team. While most of these readings are pretty bogus, even though he is kind of on the mark with Tsubasa being a dog and Kijino's foreboding aura, only one of them seemed to have any deeper meaning. Saruhara is told he's haunted by the spirit of a scarecrow, something which the other team members find fitting, seeing as he doesn't do anything, both in-universe and in the story. But a producer on the series' production blog gives greater context as to why a scarecrow in particular was chosen. I think the producer in question was Shinichiro Shirakura, because the quote I'm citing is from a Japanese article that I ran through Romaji Desu, so it might not be the most reliable source. Anyhow, the post says, Scarecrow also has another meaning. Since ancient times, the Scarecrow has been the guardian deity of the fields. Because the Scarecrow protects the fields, it is said that people came to worship it as the god of the fields and the god of fertility. In short, the Scarecrow is also the Yorishiro of the god who accepts people's prayers. Made in the likeness of God, and even if he cannot become a god, he is with the wishes of the people who live there, just watching over people's lives. You can laugh at Shinichi Saruhara as a scarecrow, or you can love him as someone who watches over people's daily lives. I guess there's the definitive piece in defining Saruhara's role in the story. He's a scarecrow, an observer. His role in the story isn't to influence it, but to watch over others and protect the daily lives of the people living in it. So, this should be it, right? Even if it's not an outright declaration of Shinichi's role in the story, it's a somewhat clear direction of the role he's supposed to occupy, given straight from someone who worked on the show. Well, even if Shirakura had an influence on how Donbrothers as a whole turned out, he's not necessarily the best person to ask when it comes to authorial intent. He even admits in the blog post that he wasn't sure what Toshiki Inoue intended when he wrote this part of Shinichi's story. Ultimately, this really isn't a conclusive answer. It's just another way of looking at a character which can be interpreted in many different ways. I think the only way we're really going to be able to figure out Saruhara's purpose in the story is to get as close as we can to the mind of Inoue himself, using the go-to method of video essayists everywhere: thematic analysis. When Toshiki Inoue set out to write the members of the main Donbrothers team, he wrote them with the intent not to make them superheroes, but your average everyday people. This resulted in a team with traits not too far off from the people who turn into the monsters they fight. Something demonstrated on occasion where people capable of becoming Donbrothers wind up becoming monsters themselves. So all of the Donbrothers are inherently flawed in some way, as all people are. Taro is great at everything, but holds everyone else to the same standard, and is honest to a fault, causing everyone to dislike him. Haruka is a teenager, complete with all the irrational decision-making, emotional swings, and occasional bouts of being fucking terrifying. Jiro forces himself to suppress parts of his true personality so he can be the heroic archetype capable of leading a team, and when he's told that isn't enough, those suppressed emotions come out in an unstable and violent manner. Tsubasa's the stray dog, the outsider unable to confide in others, whose choice to fight his battles alone results in him getting deeper into situations he can't handle. And Kishino... Again, I really don't need to go into him. If you've seen the show, you know what his flaw is. That just leaves Saruhara, and his flaw might require some explanation of the way he chooses to live his life. Wabi-sabi, as I described in the intro as simply as possible, is a philosophy based around accepting that nature, and by extension, the people that occupy it, are imperfect. Over the years, it's also implemented aspects of Buddhist philosophy. And seeing as a lot of Japan's beliefs seem to be based around drawing on traditions from multiple religions, it can be assumed that the form of wabi-sabi Saruhara practices draws a lot directly from Buddhism as well. The interesting thing about this is that it seems like the perfect antithesis to how the Noto view humanity, as well as a counter against ever becoming a Hitotsuki himself. Saruhara is unique among the Donbrothers in that, from the show's outset, he's actively aware of the vices that others can fall victim to, and chooses to reject them. So if Saruhara's life is built around being aware of and accepting his own flaws, as they come with being a human, how can he be another facet of the spectrum of flawed people that make up the Donbrothers? Well, after Taro dies for the second time, not counting all the times he flatlined from lying, the Noto temporarily take control of the Donbrothers, and in a test to prove that they should all be on equal standing, Sonoi amplifies the desires of the three Donbrothers to see if they'll be able to withstand overwhelming desire. Kishino and Haruka's desires are what you'd expect them to be, but with Shinichi, his desire is to keep living the wabi-sabi lifestyle. The lifestyle built around enlightenment and being free of earthly desires. That's weird, right? The idea that a person's desire to be as free from earthly desire as possible is in and of itself an earthly desire? Is the desire to live virtuous just as greedy as any other desire? As Taro himself points out in an earlier episode, Shinichi is effectively indulging himself on his own feelings of self-righteousness. There are points where he'll completely drop the mentality because someone, namely Taro, calls him out on it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Saruhara, despite how he chooses to see himself, is just another aspect of humanity's flaws, our need to frame ourselves as morally just people by abstaining from our desires, ironically being a desire. When we do something good, some healthier alternative, some morally just action, are we doing it because we're a good person, or because we want to indulge in the self-satisfaction of doing a good thing? And if so, does that make us greedy? If you look at him that way, Saruhara could even be seen as a more understated version of what Jiro is, a person actively pursuing a desired way of life while pushing down any negative emotions that arise. But if you look at him that way, that doesn't really help his case. Unlike Saruhara, Jiro actually got an arc which caused him to realize that mentality was unhealthy, and grew past it. With Shinichi, there's nothing inherently unhealthy about his mentality, at least within the narrative of the show, so he has no reason to go through an arc. Even if all of the other Donbrothers are flawed in some way, it's the same deal with the comic relief argument because their flaws are at least somewhat addressed in their character arcs. I can choose to view Saruhara as another facet of the flawed Donbrothers, but that doesn't change the fact that the show doesn't do anything to address it, and the same can be said for any of the other perspectives I've just described. Damn it, I keep running into walls with this guy. The closest thing I have to any insight into his character is a comment a producer made about something that could have just been a joke on Inoue's part. I don't even know if I would have said anything about it if he hadn't addressed it. I think I should probably just call it at this point. I've got 3 equally valid, by which I mean 3 equally invalid, viewpoints on how I can choose to view my favorite character within the narrative of his original story. That's probably good enough. I mean, I don't know how long this video will be as I'm writing it out, so if I call it quits here, I think people will be satisfied. I mean, there's only so much the human mind is capable of. Shit! The human psyche is a complicated mess. There are a lot of times where we try to tell ourselves it isn't, but it is. Because if it wasn't, then we'd pretty much be able to accurately guess what a person's thought behind a decision was from an outside glance. But we can't do that. Our view into that person's mind is limited to what they decide to tell us. And sometimes they don't tell us everything. Sometimes they lie to us. Sometimes they leave things out. Regardless of what they decide to tell us, what's told, by choice or not, is a narrative. And that narrative, even if the person telling it doesn't know it, is the closest thing we have to a direct view into their mind. So, in order to comprehend that narrative, to figure out what its creator's intent was, we start to look beneath what is explicitly said. What's beneath is sometimes called subtext. Mainly whenever people don't know that word. Subtext is basically what the creator of a work, or what someone observing the work, thinks the themes and hidden meaning of the work really are. There's this concept called death of the author, which if you've been on the internet you're sick of hearing, and while its original meaning is detaching a work's value from their author after they've passed away, nowadays it generally means that the author's intention holds no weight when it comes to someone's interpretation of the subtext. So, with all that spelled out, here's the 2 things I want to make really apparent. The human mind is a complicated enigma, and fiction is the closest thing we have towards decoding what lies inside of it. The meaning behind fiction is drawn from the perception brought forward by the human mind. Therefore, the only conclusion I can come to is that the only reason stories seem to have complexity and depth is because we as humans are the ones adding that depth to them. Themes, and by extension, thematic consistency, only exist when we observe them. Kind of like Schrodinger's cat, but for fiction, and not some stupid hypothetical thing for quantum physics whatever. In a show like Donbrothers, where certain themes and ideas are left up to audience interpretation, it could be argued that any thematic strength the show has is based entirely on audience perception. The 3 ways I listed you could view Saruhara as a character only exist upon looking at the media and gaining our own interpretation, based both off the media itself as well as external media we've consumed. I guess what I'm trying to say is, thematic consistency in a work doesn't actually exist, because the themes of a work depend on the view of the person consuming it, and there's no way in hell that every piece will fit into the mind puzzle that they've constructed. That and a billion external factors in helping a piece of media get made might interfere, but that's another story. It doesn't matter if one perspective is more informed than the other, because they're both equally valid and invalid in regards to being a direct reading of the work's true meaning. So we know that we can't trust our own interpretation of Donbrothers because it's not a fully formed direct look at a man's psyche. The same can be said for anyone besides him working on the show, and we can't trust him because we as observers might know the themes of his narrative better than he does. What the hell do we do now? The one thing we can do. Take a look at the blatant, obvious thing that Toshiki Inoue 100% wanted to make clear in his narrative. To do that, we have to pull back and look at the text. So, let's do that. What is the one very explicit theme that Donbrothers wants us to know? Humans are flawed. Hey, before I finish this, I think I'm going to talk about monkeys for a sec. Journey to the West is, nowadays, a pretty well-known Chinese folktale, at least in some circles. However, my first introduction to the story was a slightly alternative version told in the graphic novel American-Born Chinese by Jean Luen Yang. Yes, I know there's a Disney Plus show, but I don't care, it's not relevant. The story focuses on the Monkey King, after his rejection from a dinner party with various powerful deities as a result of him not wearing any shoes. The king brings up his royal status as well as his mastery of the prerequisites to immortality.
Look, you may be a king. You may even be a deity, but you are still a monkey.
This causes the Monkey King to go into a violent rage, physically assaulting everyone at the party before retreating to train himself, achieving greater discipline and transcending to a higher form, the Great Sage, equal of heaven. After his training is complete, the Great Sage goes all over the world, visiting various gods, demons, and spirits, and beating the shit out of all of them. In order to stop him, the deities request the aid of Suyotsa, the creator of the universe. He visits the Great Sage and tries to explain to him that he doesn't make mistakes. The person he is a monkey, and that's who he'll always be. The Great Sage tries to fight back against this, and so Suyotsa buries him under a mountain of rock, trapping him there indefinitely. This is until 500 years later, when he's approached by a monk, giving him a chance at freedom only by releasing his transformation and accepting who he really is. And to make a long story short, the Great Sage becomes a monkey once more, and the journey to the West begins. Why does this matter? Well, firstly, because Donbrothers in its early production stages was conceived as an adaptation of Journey to the West, but eventually switched over to Momotaro, which is what got me thinking about this. And secondly, because this version of the story is ultimately about how we can delude ourselves into thinking we've got some unique way of viewing the world, that we truly understand who we are. But we often don't, because sometimes we forget we're all monkeys. And, though it might be controversial to say this, Toshiki Inoue is a monkey too. Shinichi Saruhara may be at peace with his flaws as a human. He may have reached some form of enlightenment. But he's still a monkey. And that monkey is a reflection of the mind that created him. You can call Avataro Sentai Donbrothers a masterpiece. You can probably even call it one of the best toku in years. But we shouldn't try to pretend that everything about it clicks perfectly. I'm sure there'll be people in the comments pointing out things they didn't like about it, and that's good. Art, made by people, is not some finely tuned machine where everything clicks into place perfectly. They're reflections of the people that made them, and as Donbrothers made blatantly obvious, people are flawed. If a piece of media has a contradiction, a thing that doesn't match what we see as a thematic through line, that media was made by a flawed individual, and the thematic through line was observed by a flawed person. Nothing is going to be perfect. This isn't saying that creators can't or shouldn't try to put themes or messages in their work, or that people shouldn't try to read into their work. That's always going to be a part of the art creation criticism cycle. I'm just saying we shouldn't hold artists accountable if the art they create doesn't completely hold together. Thinking perfect thematic cohesion is necessary for a story to be good is stupid. The rules of self-expression aren't rigid and set in stone. It can be brought forward in multiple forms, and the same can be said for the themes. Sometimes they exist purely through viewer interpretation, and other times an author can just choose to forego a solid thesis to base their work around. There's a lot you can do. Art is meant to represent who we are, and what we are isn't some all-powerful deity with mastery and knowledge about all parts of ourselves. We're monkeys. Stupid, stupid monkeys. And besides, even if your art isn't perfect or well put together, guess what? As long as other people are able to resonate with it, then whatever message you were trying to get across will still get across, regardless of form. You are entitled to tell your story however you want, you are entitled to have your own reading of a story's themes, and it's all valid because everything's bullshit. And so, I guess that's the beauty of a character like Shinichi Saruhara. He's the embodiment of the flawed, but amazing, human mind that created him. He's not a part of the greater narrative of the world he lives in, because he doesn't need to be. Wabi-sabi is about accepting the flaws of humanity, and it's by accepting the flaws of humanity that we can see how he came into existence. An existence with no need to be justified. It's funny. The producer called Saruhara an observer, but the truth is, we're the observer, watching him, justifying his being so he doesn't have to. Okay, so I know that the conclusion I came to doesn't fully apply to every piece of art, especially big projects with a lot of people in the kitchen. And people are definitely going to read into things in the opposite direction you were intending. That's just part of life. I guess I just want to say, nobody's capable of transcendence, and so no art will ever be perfect. Don't get hung up on something when it's not 100% good, just accept the flaws and try to resonate with the creative behind it. Also, yes, I'm aware I'm covering my own ass by saying thematic consistency isn't a necessary thing in a video that's gone from analyzing the killer robot episode of a show to talking about how we perceive art and media, so don't bother pointing it out. Well, I'm glad I finally did something with that film degree, but I'm kind of philosophied out. Next time, I'm going to do something really stupid. Lates. Hey, 1 year later, Alex here. If you're wondering what took me so long in releasing this video, in addition to having a full-time job now, originally, I was going to animate my avatar like this. Yeah, I did that entirely in After Effects and realized I hated it, so I scrapped it and went with the other one. Anyways, sorry for taking so long to upload a new thing, and sorry if it went a little out there at the end. Thankfully, I've said my piece about Donbrothers, one of my favorite toku of the past few years, so hopefully my next project will be about something entirely different. Oh hey, what's that?